All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us. We're about 1 minute after the hour, and it looks like more people are still joining, but we'll go ahead and jump in. So welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm marketing operations here at Smarty. Today's webinar is about using Smarty to clean your address database, and we're super excited to get started. However, before I introduce our presenters, let's go over just a couple basic housekeeping items. Number one, this webinar is being recorded. We will send a copy of the recording out to everyone who registered. So you can be looking for that in your inbox within a day or two. We'll try to get that sent out as soon as possible. This also means that if you need to step out early, or if there's something in it that you think would be really great to share with someone else, you'll be able to view it later and share it and catch up on that recording at a later time. To interact with our presenters or even the other audience members, feel free to use the chat and question features inside the Zoom webinar interface. You'll see that at the bottom if you're in the default view, I believe, so you can find those. And we'll be ready to take your questions during the session if you have a question about what we're talking about, or we'll hold your questions to the Q&A at the end of the presentation. All right, so to introduce our speakers, you guys can go ahead and be seen now. We've got Kent Jividen and Brian Amundsen with us, and they're both fantastic developers here at the Smarty team. We're very excited to hear what you guys have to share. So without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Kent and Brian, and I'll progress the slides for us as well.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So I'm Kent Jividen. I'm a software developer here at Smarty Streets, and we're happy to show you what we're going to be doing here. So we're going to cover a number of things on how there's a few different ways that you're going to be able to clean your addresses in your database. We'll show you kind of some tools and how to prepare some of your data to prepare for that. And then we'll show you a command line tool that you'll be able to do for that. And then we'll show you some raw HTTP APIs that you can access through code or through other means. And then we'll go through and show you one of our SDKs, our Python SDK. We have a number of SDKs that we'll show you or that are available, and we'll just kind of touch on one of those. And then you can go to our website if there's a specific SDK for your language that you will want. So that gives you kind of an idea of what we're going to kind of go through during this webinar. So we have a set of notes, and I will share my screen here with you. We have a set of notes that we will send afterwards. And Andrew, can you see those?
It's great.
Okay, so you don't have to take these detailed notes. If there's other notes you want to take, that's great, but we will send this to you after the presentation with some of what we've discussed here. So you will have a reference afterwards, and we'll be referencing this doc throughout the presentation so that you'll have an idea of what some of the details are. So the first thing that we kind of want to go through is we're going to talk about how you can take your database, create some CSV files to prepare that data, and run it through our system to clean up those addresses. And then you can then re-import that into your database, or however you want to deal with that, you're welcome to. And so we'll just talk about that first, about how to prepare some of this data and what some of the options are. And then we'll go, after that, we'll talk about how to use the command line interface to also clean these up. So to begin with, if you have a database that you're looking to clean the addresses for, you can dump those addresses to a CSV file. And there are some ways to make that easier to handle and to process. And the available columns for this, so if you dump it to a CSV, you can either be comma delimited or tab delimited. And you need to include a header row with those column names as shown. So the input ID is optional. And then you can do a street, which is the one that's required. And then we have some different components of the address. And I'll show you these in just a moment. There's secondary city, state, zip code, and then we'll talk a little bit about the different options we have as far as matching. We have some great utilities that can help you dial up or dial down how aggressive you'd like the match to be and how you'd like it to clean up. There are three basic ways to structure this data, and they all have pros and cons. depending on how you want to do it. You can place, if we look at, so let me show you, I'll just pull up a spreadsheet here real fast. So here's a sample export of data, just with 2 records. We have our header right here. And you can see in this case, we have the input ID, street, secondary, city, state, and zip code. You can put these in different ways, one of which we would call a free form. So let me show you that in a text file. This would be what we would call a free form address. So we have an input ID at the front. This can be a GUID or however a unique ID from your database, whatever you'd like it to be. And then we have, if you notice here, this address is all in the second column, and it is all straight, no broken up. It's not broken up into components. There's no separate zip code or anything. It's just a free form dumped in address here. You can do that, and then we'll parse that out and figure out and try and match out the and clean up these addresses for you. And we'll show you that in just a minute. The next way that you can do this is you can do what we call first line, last line. So you have what would be the street item, including secondary designators and secondaries that would go in the street. And then you'd have your city, state, and zip that would go into the second line. And so that's what we call kind of a first line, last line way of organizing your data. Then we have component, and that's if you've broken out street, secondary, city, state, and zip code. And so that's more of a component mode, and we handle all 3 different modes as far as cleaning up your data. And you can pass all 3 of these into the various utilities in various ways that we'll show you. And soon that will be, we'll show you the CLI to begin with. So those are 3 different modes, or 3 different ways that you can kind of organize your data depending on what your data is coming from. You can dump it again to CSV, which is comma delimited or tab delimited. And then you can use that to import via the CLI. Okay, so that's the data. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the match column. The match column is a 4th column here that you would put in. And that is, there are 3 different kinds of match columns, and we'll show you that shortly. When we get into, or 3 different match types, as it were, that we can do. And we'll show you the differences a little bit when we show the APIs, and you can get an idea of what they are. They're strict, invalid, and the new one is enhanced. And they have some various capabilities depending on what your use case might be. So we'll talk about that a little bit in just a moment with the APIs. But again, here's the sample input CSVs that you can do. And now Brian is going to take some of these samples and show you how to use that through the command line interface, or in other words, the Smarty list interface, which you can use from the command line.
All right, very good. Thanks, Kent. So Smarty list, or the CLI, as some people like to call it, is just a way for us to be able to process those CSV files. You can get Smarty list, and this document has this link here, and you can get Smarty list. Of course, it didn't open up on my right screen. It certainly did during my little demo part, but you can get Smarty list by going to our website, go into resources here, bulk address validation. And this is just a tool where you can try out some of the files that Kent just barely pointed out. Or you can put some of your data in here as well, your live data. Down here at the bottom, though, there is a link that says the command line version. And this allows you to be able to get some information about the command line version, the input file formats, and so forth. It has a lot of good information here. But here is where we would download for your particular platform, the CLI. And I've already gotten the one for Mac OS, which is the OS that we're on, and have installed it. It's just an executable, a simple executable. In order to be able to run that executable, the best way to do this, and the easiest way to put in your authentication ID and token. And hopefully you're familiar enough with Smarty, and I can show you basically where those are within the browser. Let me move these faces out of the way. Once you are logged in, you go into your account and you can see your API keys here. And these API keys, of which I just exposed mine, so I'll rotate them after this. But those API keys are basically where you would get your information for your Smarty Auth ID and Smarty Auth token. So in my environment, I've already set up my environment variables with those two things already set up. So all I have to do is just run Smarty list from the command line, and it will understand that it is going against my account. So there's a couple of ways to run this. First of all, let's go ahead and just run Smarty list with help. And you can see that it does we do have a lot of options here. Some of these things, don't be intimidated. Some of these things are not really necessary unless you want to get into some of the advanced options of it. For right now, we're just going to run just a simple input file. So it would just be Smarty list minus input. Yeah, let's go ahead and be a little bit smarter about it. Smarty list input webinar data CSV. Now, I want to point out a couple of things here. What it does is it analyzes your CSV file first. It also will tell you where the output is going to go. There's a log file that keeps some statistics, and then your auth ID and token. One thing that I wanted to point out, though, is that the file type. In my particular file, and I'll show it here in a second, there was only one column in it. When you have one column, it defaults to tab delimited. So if we don't want tab delimited, what we could do, is you can see that this is a free-form one. If you put a delimiter at the end of your header, and normally you wouldn't have just one column in here, but I just wanted to point this out so when you're testing you won't be confused. Just put a delimiter at the end of that first column. Then when we run Smarty list, we'll notice that the file type here is actually a comma. So let's go ahead and run this and just show you how fast it is. There's 4,593 addresses in this, and it will process it in 3 seconds. This just happens to be on my home network, so it's a little bit slower. But typically we get about 5,000 addresses per second or so. And we'll talk about why Smarty list is so fast as well in a little bit. But let's go ahead and take a look at the file that it generated. You'll notice that the very first part of it is our input columns. So street is what we specified. The other information that it puts into the file are the headers are included in brackets. So you can tell the difference between your input and what Smarty list generated for you. So you can see that for these addresses, it returns a whole lot of information. And Kent will point out some of the pieces of information here in a second. But that is basically the steps that you would go through once you dump out your data into a CSV, run Smarty list, and then you have all this information that you can pull from when you want to import your data back into your database. I just wanted to point out a couple of things here before we go. Or before I turn it back over to Kent. What is enhanced mode? Kent will kind of talk a little bit more about enhanced mode, but it's a more aggressive search mode. And you can specify on the command line, as you see here, that you can either put the match mode into your file, or if you want to process the entire file with one match mode, you can specify it here on the command line. The enhanced mode does require an additional license. So if you are going to run enhanced mode, you will need to get a license for that. And this is where your license string would go in that case. So why is the CLI so fast? We can process millions of records very quickly. A lot of people ask us this because as developers, they attempt to use our SDK, which, by the way, the CLI does use our Go SDK, that it's written in the Go language. And they don't get the performance that our CLI gets. Well, it's simply because it's multi-threaded and it's very efficient multi-threaded. It will start up 100 threads by default, or sorry, 10 threads by default, and it batches all of the address in batches of 100. And then the CLI will then sequence them back so that your output file is in the same order as your input file. And it's very fast. So if you are going to write your own program using our APIs and expect to get the same performance, it will be a little bit for you to manage those multiple threads. It's certainly possible, and it's a bit of work. It's multi-threaded it's programming is an art form in a way. So the output file, I kind of explained a little bit about that and showed what that is. It does auto detect the delimiter. You can use a tab delimiter and it will output with a tab delimiter or with a comma delimiter, and it will output in that same format. This is just a really ugly dump here, but you can see that all of the input files do not have brackets around them or columns. All of the output columns that was generated by the CLI do have those brackets around them, so you can differentiate between the two. It does keep a log, and I can show you that. So when you run it, you can see that it generates a log. And really all it is basically a summary of what you saw on that beginning page when you ran the CLI, as well as some statistics. Well, let's see. Oh, this one was not the right one. This is when I quit. So let's take a look at the right one here. Anyway, so you can see that the log is more helpful when you do have errors, so that you can you can determine what went on. If you're not authenticated properly, if your auth ID and token are not correct, then it will tell you in the log what went on. So that's kind of an overview of the CLI. So I'll turn it now back over to Kent, so he can talk about.
Kent, if it's all right, before we jump into your section, we've had a couple of questions, gentlemen, about the power, the effectiveness, just how good our validation and correction is. So if an address is 123 Main Street, but with no spaces between 123 and Main and Street, will it still be able to identify something like that?
Yeah, so there are many things that we do that you can identify. And I will actually show you right now how you can test that scenario out and the various scenarios you might be interested in right on our webpage. Our webpage, the APIs, the CLI, et cetera, all use the same backend interface to process these addresses. So if there's a specific pattern that you're looking to test to see if it'll clean up and detect, you can test that on the website and see if that works. If it works there, it's going to work with the CLI, it'll work with the APIs and everything else. So I will show you that in a moment of how to go through a one-off scenario, just even on our website to test that.
Okay, that's great. And then the one other question was, and I don't remember if we're going to address this later, so I'll bring it up now. How do we, um, what responses do we get to PO boxes?
For PO boxes, so we can actually I can show you one. We handle PO boxes. It depends on the PO box in the part of the country of what detail we can give. But we do handle PO box verification and validation. So that is all handled within the same interface.
Okay.
And you can do it via free form or component, just like any other address itself.
Sure. All right, great. That's all we'll take right now. I'll hold some more for later.
Okay, great. Let me show you, because this will help answer some of these questions. I will take the screen back here. Okay. I'm going to run through the API a little bit here. And this is, you can go straight to this on our website. And we have a couple of different ways. Brian touched a little bit on the bulk address validation API, and you can go play around with that with or without the CLE or CLI. And then here are two other ones that we're going to touch on here. So this is a single address verification. If you click on this, you can enter in an address. So let's enter in a PO box here. Somebody was asking about that. So we'll enter in a PO box in Provo. Once you enter in that PO box, you can see some various information about that PO box, including some metadata, some analysis, some components. This is all documented in our documentation. So there's a lot of this comes from the USPS. Some of this is add-on that we add. So there is a lot of information here, and we're not going to go through each piece of information on this call, but it is very well documented within our documentation. To get to that documentation, again, you can go to resources, go to all documentation or cloud API reference. And under here, we're talking about the US Street Address API is what we're kind of dealing with here. And in here, you can see all of the information about each individual tag, the different components and what they mean, DPV codes, et cetera. And these are all well documented within here. So for example, you can say the match code if it's an AABB, and the entire address is valid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of information here, and you can look at that at your leisure. Now, the other thing, that's all great for the single address, but I personally, this is the single address version, but as a developer, I personally like the address validation APIs because it gives me a little bit more power in what we can do. So we go to that again, same link, go to address validation APIs. And once we're here, we can actually enter in our different samples. So for those examples that you were asking about, you could come here and test any certain pattern that you would like to do, and you can test it against the various match modes, which we'll talk in a second to see what the differences are. We also provide up here some examples to fill out. So if we check this address, this is an address in New Jersey. One nice thing is this gives us, so this is in component form, right? So we have the street, the city, state, zip code. The number of candidates is how many candidates we might want back if it's, say, an ambiguous address. Say we don't know the east or the west, and we want to know all the addresses that might be returned by that. You can say how many candidates you might want back, and then you can evaluate them as you would want. And then the match mode, which we'll talk about in just a second. One other nice thing about this is it actually will give you a nice test curl statement that you can use. Or you can see it in post, and this is the get version of the curl statement. This is the post version of the curl statement, or this is the raw HTTP request version of the statement. So if you're developing your own API and don't want to use our SDK or just want to test out various things, you can do that. So we're going to go ahead and use, let's go ahead and run this. Oh, so that once we have an address here, we're going to say view response. The response comes back in JSON. We get a 200 OK for the HTTP status. And then we have all this information about the address. So we have the delivery line, the last line, so first line, last line, the delivery barcode of this address that was verified, the various components of that address. So we know the primary number, street name, etc., zip code, delivery point, any metadata that's available for this, including, and there's quite a bit, including lat longs, and geocodes, and the precision of those lat longs, including our new rooftop precision that is available if we have that data and that's available. And then various things about this address and how good of a match we've determined that this is. In this case, this is an AABB. It's got a DP batch code of Y, and we know that this is a deliverable address and is a good version of that address. So there's a lot of information here that you can see. Now, let me show you, if we go ahead and do this on the command line with a curl statement, I can copy and paste that, and we'll see that I haven't added my key. So I will go and grab one where I have a key. All right, add my curl statement. You got a bad space in there. Okay, so here's a curl statement. Again, here, I'll push this curl statement up here so we can see. So I'm hitting the API. I've added a key for an environment variable for both my auth ID and token. Here's the street. I'm looking up this address with apartment 10 and the city. So I'm doing what we'd call a first line, last line. And then I'm just piping it to a nice utility called JQ so the JSON's easier to read for this presentation. So as you can see, it returned JSON in this curl statement. And it's got all that same type of information that we saw within the web UI. So you can use curl. You can use, if you want to write your interface directly with the API using your own HTTP call stack, however you want to do that, you can do it with this method. You can call this. This is in a get statement. Let me show you now a post statement, a sample post statement with a batch command. So this is a little bit different. Clear off my screen here. This is a little bit different. This is so that we can do batch requests. Now, if we look at this, the parameters are all the same up here. I am passing a license of a specific license here, and I'm expecting it to be JSON. But here is the post data. So you notice instead of doing a get, like we saw here, where everything is in the get phase, we do a post, some post information, okay? We're still saying how many candidates we want returned back, but in this case, we have the same street we did before, same city, and it can be a component or not. We can set the match, parameter to the various ones, and we'll talk about the difference of those in just a second. But then now you see that I am actually looking for a second address that is in free form in this case. So we don't supply any second line in the city or state. And we're also using a matched. So let's see what this does. So this returned now 2 verified addresses. We see our first one, which we dealt with earlier, same information, but now we see our second one with the second verified information. It's an AABB with DP batch code yes, and we know that it's a good and verified address with the lat long. So we can batch. So Brian mentioned that you could batch with CLI, which is what we do, which increases speed. But this is also another way that you can batch your addresses, which we recommend to do if you're accessing the API directly. It'll increase your speed because you don't have the latency of the HTTP calls going back and forth. And so, and you can send a whole bunch of batches, multi-threaded, to increase your speed as needed. So that gives you a little bit of an idea on how the curl statements work, or the actual HTTP API statements work, both for doing a single request and doing a batch request. Now, again, if you want to see any of the documentation about this, you can go to our documentation and talk to it. But let's talk a little bit about the match. We have 3 different match modes, all right? There's invalid, which you see here. There's strict, and then there is enhanced, okay? Strict, let's run an address through strict mode. And let's go ahead and make it a road that literally does not exist. That road does not exist, so it does not verify. We don't return anything because we're strictly verifying that road. Now let's turn it into invalid mode. In invalid mode, we will return everything we know about this address. Okay, so the street is not valid, but we'd still know some things about this address. We have a general idea about what the zip code is, where the city is, where the state is, et cetera. So we do know some things about this address. And whatever we do know, and sometimes we know more or less, depending on what is wrong with the address and what it's missing, we'll return what is valid and what we do know in an invalid mode. We still flag it, and A1 means it's an invalid address, so we know it's still not deliverable, but there still might be good information about this address, especially when you come to things like secondaries that are missing, or things like that, where you have an apartment and you're missing just the secondary, but you'd still know that the main building is there, and you might want the lat long or voting district or county information, et cetera, about that building, even if you don't know that specific apartment in that building is deliverable. So invalid mode gives you a lot more information as needed for a specific address if you want. Otherwise, you can use strict mode. Now, enhanced mode is our new mode. This mode gives you, so I need to enable that. Let's go ahead and reset this form for the example. That it does require, as Brian mentioned, it does require an extra license for enhanced mode. Oh, that example doesn't have it. So, well, let me show you here. I'll show you actually on the curl statement. That'll give us a little bit more information. So enhanced mode gives us more information, including our precision, our rooftop, geocode, lat longs. It also includes, and marketing and sales can give you more details on this, but it includes a number of addresses that are not USPS addresses. They're non-USPS addresses. So there's a whole set of data that is also included in that we can validate against, that are valid addresses that aren't included in the USPS data set. It includes extra geocodes. It includes some other information, and it also has some extra validation upticks it's a more aggressive mode for your validation. And you're welcome to test that as needed, again, with a specific license that you have for that. And you can see the differences. But there are some significant advantages to using enhanced mode, both for geocoding, better matching, and more addresses. So those are the three different modes that we have available via the API. Let's see, I'm just looking at my notes.
You know, one of the questions that was asked is if you don't have a space between your street name and the street suffix, for example, there are certain things within enhanced mode that we are working hard on to make sure that we handle those types of situations. Whereas in many cases, USPS will not understand what you're talking about because they don't have spaces between the components. Enhanced mode, we're working and we're always improving to make sure that any errors within the data that the user has done when they entered it in are handled. We're not going to handle every case. I don't know that anybody could handle every case, but we do a lot with separating words that shouldn't be separated, or if a user puts in a space and there should be a space there, we try to handle as many of those cases as we can.
Yeah, and marketing and sales has some great examples of crazy addresses that we can validate that I'm sure they'll be happy to show you, because there is some significant increase in matching capabilities within the enhanced mode. And it's pretty fun what you can match in that mode, and I'm sure they'll be happy to show you some crazy ones.
There's a lot of questions along these same lines, like what about missing components, like it doesn't have a city, or it's missing a zip code, or both?
Yeah, so let's address that. So
Sure.
So missing components, we do our best to match. If you're missing a city and a state but have a zip code, we'll almost always match on that. And same vice versa. If you're missing a zip code but have a city in the state, we'll match on that. With enhanced mode. Enhanced mode has got some increases there that help with that, that some of the other two modes don't. So there, with enhanced mode, you have a lot more flexibility on the data that you might be missing, and will still produce a good match.
What about international addresses?
Yeah, so international is a whole nother topic that we would be happy to discuss on another webinar. Maybe we should do that. There, again, you can go here and you can test internationals. And we are continuing to improve this product all the time. Also, we have an international street API verification and also international address autocomplete. And someday, Andrew, maybe we should do another one for international. But
yeah, that'd be good. The one other question that has come up in a couple different places is about the geocoding accuracy. So we claim rooftop geocoding accuracy, and a lot of people, we have some questions saying, how do you identify a rooftop? How accurate is your rooftop data? Do you, if we claim a rooftop, do we tell anybody if it's not rooftop, or do we just, can you speak? I know that's a whole other webinar as well, geocoding in and of itself.
It is.
One of those points, those data set points that you get when you, validate all of these addresses is a geocode. So if you can speak just a little bit to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So when we return, we're pretty confident in our geocoding abilities. So, and we have different levels of geocodes, right? So, and we will determine whether or not we have rooftop or zip 9 capabilities, or down to like zip 5 capabilities, or parcel, etc. So that is indicated, especially in enhanced mode for rooftop. You'll see this right here of the lat long. And I encourage you to test it yourself and see how you feel about our accuracy. And sales and marketing will have some more information. They can show you pattern matches that they've seen, that they've been given, where you have city blocks and the rooftops are set right on the actual buildings that they need to be. So as far as what accuracy is returned, that is dependent on the license that you use. And then as far as what our reliability is on that particular address and how reliable we feel that geocode is, it'll be indicated here in this precision return. And if it's rooftop, that's pretty accurate, and it's going to go down within that roof. And there's the lat long. As far as the reliability of the data and where we get it and so on and how we determine that, that's a whole big thing. So
our secret sauce.
Yeah, there's some secret sauce in there for sure. So, but as far as returning it and determining whether it's been determined that it is a rooftop or a zip 9 address, you can look here for this. And this will say rooftop is the most accurate, and it'll go down from there, down to like a zip 4, zip 5, or possibly sometimes if it's a broad enough area or in the ocean or something, we might not have the specific precision.
Excellent. I know we have a lot more questions, but I know we have another section. So let's plug ahead, and then we'll take questions as we have time at the end.
Okay, yeah, we can do a whole question answer afterwards there. So, okay, so that tells you how to access the API kind of raw, just using HTTP requests. You can do it through our web tools, or you can do it through curl, or you can do it through your own application via HTTP requests. Now, Brian's going to show you one of our SDKs. We have multiple SDKs, but he will show you the Python SDK and how to use that to help you with any of your development needs.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Ken. So let's go back to our web page here and the Cloud API reference that Kent had pointed out before. Oops, wrong one. Let's go to our SDK reference. So these are the SDKs that are available to us or to you. Well, the interesting thing is we use our own SDKs. So we, as they say in the industry, eat our own dog food all the time. So if there is anything in these SDKs that we don't like, we make sure the improvements are made in all of the SDKs. But we're going to be accessing the Python SDK. And I'm doing that simply because it's likely a language that you may already know. And it's a fairly simple scripting type language. Within these SDKs, each one of these SDK pages, it indicates how to install it, whether it's through pip, which is a Python install utility, a package manager, or if it's going out to GitHub and pulling it down. Every one of these SDKs have a different way in order to be able to install it. So it tells you that here. There's also a little video that describes how to install it and so forth if you want to watch that. What I like to do, though, is I like to go right to the examples. So that's what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at this verify US street address sample. And we're just going to copy this. And then we'll go to the command line and see and take a look at this example, this particular example, and run it so that you can see how it works. We will, if we have some time, go over a little bit of the SDK source structure, because all of these SDKs, you can see all of the source. So if you're wondering all of the field possibilities or exactly how this works, you can see the source of all of our SDKs. I think it's a really cool thing that we allow you to do. Let's go ahead and give this a try. So we want to create a let's go ahead and pull that down into this window, and let's just paste our source code in there that we got from the example. I have already installed this Python SDK, so I don't have to go through that, but it's simply just running pip. Or in my case, it's pip3, so that because I'm running Python 3. But let's go through the source here. One of the things that we do in all of our sample codes for all of our SDKs is we give you the option to embed your Smarty auth ID and token here within the source. And that is typically the default in these. But since I have put my auth ID and token in as an environment variable, we also allow that as well. And we typically have that commented out within the source. So this will give my credentials right from my environment. You can see that there are a lot of comments here with some examples if you are running, like, for example, a proxy, or if you have to add a custom header to the client, or what have you. We're just going to do a very simple building a US standard cloud license, and then we build this client, and so now we have our client object. We now want to build a lookup. And a lookup can either be a batch lookup or a single lookup. In this particular example, it's a very simple single lookup. So we're just specifying that this particular lookup is a street lookup and all of the information that we want to query for, all the components in this case. Again, if you just want to put everything on the street and leave all the rest of this empty, no problem, or not even include those within the structure. You can see that this is very similar to the way that it looked on the web page. In this case, we're specifying 3 candidates. On the web page, it's 10. Here is our match mode. And then all we've got to do is use that client object that we set up and say send lookup and give it the lookup object that we had set up. And then in this case, we want to see whether or not if the result, if there was no result for this, then we just print out a message. Otherwise, we just, in this example, we're just getting the first result as that first candidate and printing out some information. There are some other fields here that we've just commented out, but we're just going to print out the zip code, the county, and the lat long for this particular address. And really, that is all there is to the Python SDK. Again, there are a lot more examples, and if you want to look through the source code, you can. But it's a very simple thing, just simply getting the client, specifying a lookup, sending that lookup, and then examining the results. So let's go ahead and run that, see what it looks like. So we can see that that runs. It pulled my credentials from my environment, and then we print out the address. So that there's a lot that we can talk about with the SDKs, and it's probably a complete other webinar that we can get into some other details. But you can see how simple it is just to get some of that sample code and run it just so that you know your environment is all set up. So that's really all I've got for the SDK part.
Yeah, and just to touch on that a little bit too, as Brian mentioned earlier, we get a lot of questions about speed and things like that in single thread and multi-threaded. And so we encourage you, if you're planning on needing the need for speed, to use multi-threaded, to architect your application such that it's multi-threaded. The API can handle it on our side. Usually the bottleneck that we see from customers is going to be within the code itself that they have written. So the more you can do multi-threading and the more you can just take advantage of the power of the API, the faster your request will go and the faster that it'll be validated.
Yeah, Smarty scales very well. We handle a couple of billion addresses in queries a day.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen for a moment before we take any more questions, and we've got quite a few here. I do want to mention this offer that we've kind of put together. I don't want to say offer, deal. This thing that we did just for webinar participants. When you get a free account, you already get 1,000 free lookups. We'll give you an additional 1,000 free test lookups if you email Cody at smarty.com and just put webinar lookups in the subject line. You can mention maybe what you're trying to use it for. He can help to find the thing that fits your needs the most, but he will give you 1,000 additional free test lookups. So again, that email address is there on the screen, Cody at smarty.com, and put webinar lookups in the subject line. If you don't need the testing lookups, but you still have questions, do the same thing. I've mentioned that to a couple people in the chat. Send your questions to Cody at smarty.com, put webinar lookups in the title just so he's aware of where you're coming from and what angle you're having, and how he can best help you. All right, so let's jump into some of these questions. Has anyone programmed an API to run out of Microsoft Access VBA? I manage a half dozen small databases in Access.
I don't know if a specific SDK for that. We do have a .NET SDK that could probably be leveraged for that. Or you could, certainly you could import and export the CSVs and so on for that also. So there are probably some techniques that we could help point you in the right direction for something like that. But I don't know if there's an Access DB specific SDK per se. But I think you can leverage either the raw API or the .NET SDK in that scenario probably to do that, or just the straight out, exporting and importing with the CSVs, with the CLI, for example.
Okay. Is there a limit to how many address lines you can input at once? And I think we kind of addressed this, but it might be good to bring that up again.
Yeah, each batch, when you're using the SDK, each batch can handle 100 addresses. But as far as the CSV, there's no limit. I've processed millions of lines within a file using the CLI.
Cool flex, Brian. Millions.
Millions. We do a lot of testing, so
yes,
we go through lots of lookups.
Another question, and the answer to this might just be it's our secret sauce. But can you explain a little bit more about the additional addresses that are non-postal, not included in the USPS database?
Right. We have a source, and again, this is a great advantage of going with Smarty, is that we have a source for non-USPS addresses. These are addresses that actually exist. They could be deliverable by other vendors other than USPS, but USPS does not recognize them as a deliverable address for them. Yeah. And when you find a non-postal address, You have to be using the enhanced mode, and enhanced mode will tell you that it is a non-postal address. There's a particular flag when you're using enhanced mode that tells you that it's non-postal.
Yeah, and they would still have geocodes. So many of those non-postals have rooftop geocodes and other information associated with them also,
right.
Including voting districts and everything. So whatever information that is available to them, it's provided in the same interface and flagged as such. So you might see it as a non-deliverable by USPS, but you'll see that it exists and it's a completely valid address with a specific rooftop geocode. So
yeah.
there are a bunch of them.
And many times you get a non-USPS address of subdivisions that are still under construction. So it doesn't necessarily mean that address, that there's actually somebody living there. And so you kind of have to know about what you're searching for, but it is a valid address that you could actually physically go to.
Yeah, another good example is like there's a ski resort here in Utah that has a big long street of all these condos that are available, but nobody there has a technical USPS address, but they're still available as a non-USPS address and can be validated for sending via other carriers and so on. So there's a big tick there in accuracy as far as addresses are concerned with that extra data.
Wonderful. There have been a couple questions again about how good the validation is, how good the correction is for misspellings, for missing components. One person says here that in their spreadsheet of data, some people in their company may have accidentally put their address under the address 2 line instead of the address 1 line. They want to know if that's still going to validate. And another person asked if there's a sentence and an address is contained within the sentence, can we input the entire sentence and it will identify the address?
Yeah. We have what's called an extract API, and that is good for trying to extract information out of a sentence or a document that may have an embedded address in it. And so you may want to look at the extract API for that particular thing. We can handle some what we call garbage within the address, but there's obviously a limited amount of garbage that you can put in there. If you put somebody's name at the beginning of the address and then it's followed by the address and maybe has United States of America at the end, not a problem. We can parse those out in the regular US street. If it's going to be any more than that, if it's in the middle of a big sentence, then you probably want to use our extract API.
And if there's garbage within the address, my response to that is try it. I don't think anybody can do it at 100% depending on how much garbage you put in there, right? Or if you put in addresses that look like there's 2 different ones. But especially with enhanced mode, there has been quite a bit of work done to get rid of the garbage as much as possible. So, and if there's a particular address that isn't passing, it's a particular pattern that you're seeing that you think it should pass, report it to support. And that's how we'll be happy to get those tickets, and we'll see if we can come up with some magic way to do that. Right. So we'd love to have that feedback. But especially with enhanced mode, there's been a tremendous amount of work done to try and match those and verify those addresses as much as possible, even with all the garbage that is given in some cases. And sometimes it's pretty crazy what we've seen.
Yeah, just give it a try. Get on the website, see how good it is. Put a bad example in there and see if we can match it.
Yeah.
We've had a couple questions from people who are not programmers, and from the moment you opened up a programming window, a console, they locked out. In fact, we probably lost people. There may have been people that just left the webinar. If I don't have such a large database, there is a way for me to do address checks without having to log into anything, right?
If you have a large database,
if you don't have such a large database. So you can use the web form that Brian showed in the beginning if you want to insert your data into that web form. That's one option that you have. There are 2 other options that I would suggest. One is the command line looks more intimidating than it actually is. So once you run it once, you'll be able to run it multiple times. It's not too bad for you to run. And it's very, very, very efficient, much more efficient than trying to use any sort of web form interface. The second option that we would refer you to is the previous webinar that we did, which is based on the autocomplete, which might be very useful for you in a lot of cases to leverage that autocomplete if you want it on your own web form, or if you want it on a form to be able to autocomplete addresses before they become bad data. But I would not be scared of the CLI, and our support team is great to help you. If you need help walking through a basic CLI example and just need some help on how to run that, they'll be happy to help run you through that. And it's very easy to use to come in and out. And it's much more efficient than trying to use some generic web form.
Very, very true. If you have a free account or even a paid account and you only need to run a small batch, 100, 200, there's a bulk list processor you can access directly through your account login. But yeah, for the majority of what we're seeing in our customers and database, they need thousands and thousands processed at once. And what we've talked about today is the solution to that. If you guys have other questions, I just want to remind you to email Cody@smarty.com. If you'd like to view that webinar that Kent mentioned just a moment ago, you can go to smarty.com, and under resources, we have a videos section where we post webinars from weeks past. You can check those out and get yourself caught up. Don't forget to check out the documentation. It's also at smarty.com. And I think that's all we'll take for today. So thanks again, Kent. Thanks again, Brian. And thanks everybody for coming to our webinar today. We hope you found it useful, and we will see you guys in future webinars.
Have a great day, guys.